Hi, everyone. I'm Pastor Ed Treat, and I've been a Lutheran pastor for 25. I just celebrated 27 years of ordination. I can't keep track anymore. It goes so fast. But thank you for having me here, and Pastor Connie, thanks for inviting me to share this ministry with you. I'm going to first tell you a little bit about my story, personal journey, and then what brought me to what I'm doing today, and why I think it matters, and why I think you as a church, people of faith, should matter as well, or care about this. I grew up in a large Catholic family, 6 boys, 2 girls. My dad was a career military soldier, Army, U.S. Army, did a couple tours in Vietnam. We moved a lot. My mom said we moved 30 times in 20 years, 32 times in 20 years, yeah. So Dad was either in training in Texas and back in Kentucky, and then we'd go to Germany, and we'd come back, we'd go back to Germany, and so we got moved a lot as an Army family. I thought our family was pretty normal and healthy. Of course, what do you have to compare it to? I just thought this is, family life. But then after I got older and started going through some life experience and learning about my life history, I found out that my upbringing wasn't all that normal or healthy. We had a lot of... My dad came from a very tough situation in Oklahoma. He grew up in the Grapes of Wrath time, the Dust Bowl. Very, very poor. I mean, they really scraped by. His parents got divorced when he was young, and in a time and a place where that wasn't, you got ostracized for that, so they were outcast in the community. And he just worked for everything he ever had in his life. And so when he was old enough, he went into the military. But he was kind of a broken person. He had a lot of issues, personal issues, just from his own traumatic childhood. And so what happens is that we have those happen to us. We tend to... what the Bible says, the sins of the father are visited on the children to the 6th generation. We carry that stuff forward. That's our baggage, right? So I grew up in an environment that I thought was normal and healthy, but it turns out it wasn't. It was a lot of shame and blame and fear. And the fear was punishment. Dad would punish us for just, you never knew for what. I mean, one day you could do one thing, it would be fine. The next day you'd get a beating for it. And it was just depending on where he was at emotionally. And then, of course, we would all, it became a pecking order. And so we would pick on each other and find fault. And you just wanted to stay out of the limelight. How I survived that was to become the lost child. I was the kid that was always playing under the stairway. So that was a safe place for me. Anyway, there's a new diagnostic tool called ACEs. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you can Google it. It's Adverse Childhood Experiences. 10 questions, quick and easy. You can Google it and do the 10 questions and find out how many. But what they are learning is that people with 4 or more adverse childhood experiences have a much higher risk of becoming addicted or having some kind of health issue. So that's closely tied to that stuff. So it's an important diagnostic tool to go look and see how your childhood was. If you have 4 more, it's not good. I have 7 out of 10. So I feel fortunate. I scored very well. Thank you very much. I worked hard for that. Anyway, so what happened was when I got to about 12 years old, 12, 13, somewhere in there, I drank for the first time. One of my buddies stole booze from his parents. We mixed it with Coke in a mason jar and drank it. And all I remember is how great I felt. It was the first time in my life that I actually felt good. I didn't know that feeling existed. It felt so wonderful. And I didn't make a decision to be a drug and alcohol user, but I just knew it worked for me. It fixed me. And why wouldn't you? And so what I've come to learn is that most addiction has to do with pain alleviation. A lot of us in our culture tend to think it's bad people doing bad things. But so often, many times, it's hurting people trying to escape pain, and it's effective. If you have scars from your childhood, you tend to need to go to counseling or need medication. Both of those things may or may not work, and they may typically take a long time. Drugs and alcohol are very quick and work very fast to make you feel okay. So I gravitated toward those things and the people who did those things, and I was the party kid at school. I was the kid that when you see your kids hanging out with me, you would say, "Who is that? I don't think I want you hanging out with that kid." So that was me. So I was sort of the prodigal son. Went off and kind of just kept going in that direction, and into my early adulthood. And by the time I got to age 27, I'd really had burned all my bridges, and my life was going nowhere. And I was broke. I was depleted. I was bankrupt in every possible way, spiritually, emotionally, physically. I called home and asked for help. My mom had been trying to get me help for a while. She knew I had an issue. She thought I had a drug and alcohol problem, and I thought she was wrong. I knew I had a problem, and I was really ready for help, but I really didn't think it was drugs and alcohol. And I tell you that because it tells you how strong denial is, because I knew something was wrong with me, and I thought if I could get whatever that was fixed, I could drink and use drugs like normal people do. But I was, I knew that something in me had to be fixed, and I didn't think it was drugs and alcohol. So I called home, asked for help. Mom said, "We'll come and get you." But then the next day, she and my brother went to an Al-Anon meeting and learned not to rescue me and to get me other help. And so they found me a treatment center, and they said, "We think you ought to go here, and we're not going to come get you." And I was kind of devastated, but I was really at the end of my rope. Pretty scary thing for a mom to do, because the conversation I had with her the day before was so emotional that she, as a mom, probably thought I was going to kill myself if I didn't get help soon. So she said it was a really hard thing to do. Sometimes no is a saving word. Anyway, so I went into this treatment center still feeling like this wasn't my problem, and I learned about alcohol and addiction and what it does and how it works and how it progresses. I mean, it's a medical problem now. They've pretty much authorized it as a medical problem. The legal system and the medical system all agree it has all the characteristics of a disease, and so they don't say it's a disease just for the fun of it, that there is a pathology, and it's evidence-based. And so I began to learn all that and what it does to you over time, and it was like light bulbs coming on. It was like, my gosh, this explains everything. This is my problem. And that knowledge is so important. And what's really sad in our culture today is that knowledge, that understanding of the disease model and what it does, doesn't really get taught to anyone until they're in treatment. And so that's like the last place you should be learning about it. And they have found that if you do preventive work and teach people about it before that, they get help a lot sooner because they know what they're dealing with. And so we have some work to do in terms of educating our culture on what it is we're dealing with. They know that if you take somebody in a family system that has an addiction problem and you send them off for treatment and you don't do anything with the family, you treat that person, put them back in the family, their chances of getting well is almost zero. So they have found that you have to treat the family. The family has to get educated. They need to understand what they're dealing with. If you treat the family and you treat the person in treatment, chances go way, way up of improvement because you know what you're dealing with. And you don't. So what they've learned is that when someone in a family becomes addicted, the whole family has some healing to do. And if you don't heal the whole family, the addict doesn't get well. And so that is an interesting implication for all of us to learn, to say we keep sending addicts off to get help, but we don't do anything to enlighten the community that's creating the addicts. And we have an addiction problem in this country. And we're dealing with the addicts, but we're not dealing with the system that's creating it. So we're trying to bring some education to the world around addiction and what we need to learn about. All of us do, because it's all of our problems. Any of you have people or loved ones that have experienced this? It's hard to think of anybody that wouldn't. It's quite biblical. If you look in the book of Genesis, when Noah lands, he comes out of the ark, and the first thing he does is plant a vineyard, and he drinks too much, and he passes out naked in his tent, and naked being shamefully in his tent. His youngest son sees him and reports it to the brothers. They come, and they don't want to see dad like that, so they cover up. They turn around backwards. They walk in and cover him up with a blanket. They don't want to look at it. This is in the Bible. And they're the first family. We say we all descend from Adam and Eve. we really descend from Noah and his children, right? So this is the first family, and it's an alcoholic family, at least if you want to say that about this family. But all the dynamics are there. The angry alcoholic who curses his son for pointing out he has a problem, and the other family members who want to say, what problem? We don't see a problem. They just cover it up. And that's a dynamic that we all need to learn. That's how we as individuals and as a culture are dealing with this. So it's important for us to see it if we're going to ever manage to deal with it properly. So I've dealt with a lot of that from my family. I recognize a lot of that in myself. And so I began my life over at age 27, began my journey back to wholeness. And along the way, throughout those years of drinking and using drugs, I always knew that God was going to save me. I always had a faith in God. I always knew God was real and that God was my hope. And I can't even tell you the number of times I would wake up with a hangover and pray for deliverance. How much longer, Lord, must I keep doing this to myself? Get a drink of water here. Excuse me. And so I would say to myself, I need to get help. And where I would think to go to get help was church. God is at church, right? So I would go to church, and I would walk away going, I really didn't see anything there that was useful to me. And I can't tell you the number of times I did that, thinking I would find some help in the church. Then I went to treatment, and I started going to 12-step meetings, and after a while, I decided I need to get back to church. And so I would go church shopping. I would go in and out of churches with the same experience. I'm trying to deepen my spiritual life. I would go to church and look for materials or any kind of groups or anything that would seem to fit for me, and nothing ever seemed to fit. It just seemed like they were people with a different life experience, or just didn't feel like these were my people. They didn't understand what I was going through. It didn't feel like to me. And so I ended up just saying, I'm going to give up on the church and make 12-step groups my church. I told my sponsor, I said, I'm really struggling with this. And I said, I see all the things Jesus talked about happening in 12-step groups, but I don't see it so much in the church. And it was really driving me crazy, because I saw the 12-step groups really diverse, rich people, poor people, people of every color, people of every walk of life, and they were being welcomed and loved and able to share their hurts, and they laughed and they cried, and it was just really amazing, these groups. And I was terrified of that, because they were speaking, that's, we don't have many places in our world where we get to just talk about what we're going through openly and, without any fear. And for me, it was scary, but also very intriguing. And so, but I made that my home, and I decided that's where God was for me, but I never really felt fully okay with that. I felt like there was still something missing. 12-step groups do fellowship better than anybody I know, but they don't have the gospel. It's a different part of the gospel. It's about healing and hope and wholeness, but it isn't about eternal life, which is what the church has to offer, what we preach about. So my senior year of college, a friend and I decided we were going to take spring break and go find God in the wilderness, because that's where God is, right? In the wilderness, or God's everywhere. But we were kidding, saying, let's go find God. So we got out a map of the state of Washington, and we were thinking, where will we find God? And in the upper left-hand corner, there's a piece of real estate called the North Cascades National Park, and there's no roads going in. It's just really wilderness. And we thought, we got to go in there and find God, right? So we get in the car, we drive all night over the Cascade Mountains, almost died a couple times, and we get to Chelan, the town on the tip of Lake Chelan, and you get on a boat and you go to the very other tip of the lake. It's a very long lake. It's a 3-hour boat ride, it was back then. And they drop you at a little town called Stahik. It's not even a town, it's just a dock and a hamburger place and a fishing store. And they drop you there, and they'll pick you up 3 days later, at least that early in the season when we were going. And so we get on the boat, we're all alone, and then the boat stops, and about 40 people get on, and we're like, oh no, all these people, we wanted to find God in the wilderness alone. So I said to these people, are you guys going to Stehekin? And they said, no, we're going to Holden Village. And how many of you know Holden Village? When I start talking about Holden, I see a lot of smiles and head nods. So we're like, oh no, we're on a boatload of, I said, what's Holden? And they said, well, it's an adult retreat camp from the Lutheran church house. And I didn't know anything about Lutherans. And I just thought, oh great, we're on a boatload of happy Christians, right? Because my perception of Christianity up until then was Christianity was a faith where you pretended like everything was okay. I mean, it's kind of the way you experience it in church, at least a lot of churches. It wasn't until later that I learned that Lutherans really aren't all that happy, which was really a good thing, because for me, I needed a church where God could be in the hard places as well as the good places, and you didn't have to be in a good place all the time, and I really appreciate that theology of the cross. And so I'm with these people on the boat. I'm upset that they're on the going where we are, and they're going to Holden. So I said, oh, well, that's a relief. And one of the ladies said, show them the flyer. One lady pulled out of her purse a flyer that said, 12-step workshop weekend at Holden Village. I mean, isn't God amazing? I mean, we're trying to get as far away from civilization as possible, and we end up on a boatload of people going to talk about the 12 steps and recovery. And so we're marveling at that, and these ladies are saying, you should come with us, you know about this stuff. And so we got off the boat with them and went to Holden Village. And for me, it was coming home. And this is a lesson for the church, because I was like, I'm finally home. I'm at a place where I'm at a church that understands us and is talking about it. And it was such a gift. And so I volunteered at Holden Village. I became involved there for that summer, met my wife that summer. And actually was there at a subsequent event that I felt a call to ministry. Actually, not a call to ministry, a call to seminary. And decided to go to seminary while I was at Holden Village. So Holden has been really important to me. So I decided to go to seminary and become a Lutheran leader. I didn't think pastor. I thought maybe that bridge had been burned from my previous life. I thought that wasn't an option. But they kept saying, no, we make pastors here. So I said, all right. I just wanted to study God and know truth and the Bible. And so I went to seminary, and about 3 months in, I came home, and I was sort of crushed. And I just said, I've made a huge mistake. I told this to my wife. I said, the Lutheran Church is not Holden Village. And they're not talking about any of this stuff. I mean, well, Holden did. I thought maybe that was true of the whole church, but not only they're not talking about it, they're uncomfortable with it and don't want to talk about it, and they kind of push it away when it's brought up. And I thought, what am I doing here? And right about that time that I was thinking about leaving, I heard about some pastors getting together in Chicago, Missouri Synod and ELCA Lutheran pastors who were recovering alcoholics getting together in Chicago for the first time. So I said, I got to be there. I borrowed a car, I drove to Chicago, and I walked in, and here were these pastors telling their stories in a 12-step meeting. And I was like, these are my people. I'm home. So I was excited and renewed in my call and decided to stay at seminary. And I thought, well, I'll be a pastor that can help people with addiction problems. And so I thought that's how I can bring this together. And so the group that met in Chicago became a formalized 501c3 joint enterprise between the Missouri Synod and ELCA to be a support group for other clergy. Because back then in 1990, if you were a pastor and you had an addiction problem, you were thrown to the curb. You were done. And we just felt like that's not acceptable. What we know about addiction is it's a disease, it's a health issue, and it should be treated that way, and the church should treat its pastors that way. And so we formed a group called the Fellowship of Recovering Lutheran Clergy, and they're not recovering from being clergy, although that would be a useful group. So what we try to do is help bishops and synodical presidents or judicatories walk with pastors who are in need of recovery, and we show them how to do that as best we can. And then we provide some support. So we had a phone-in meeting for many years. It's now a Zoom meeting. And so pastors from all over, and especially helpful to pastors in rural places where they can't go to a 12-step meeting in town. Excuse me. They can't go to a 12-step meeting in town because of confidentiality. That's hard. Small town and gossip and all that. So it's been really helpful for pastors in these rural places to have a place where they can find support and understanding and stay in recovery. So we've been doing that for 30 years now. I've been their director for the last 18. And we, as this group, started to feel like, as the opioid crisis was growing, we thought we need to do some more. We need to educate, because we knew that clergy were going out to serve with very little knowledge of addiction. And we find that just unacceptable. We just feel like addiction is so much a part of the human experience, because it isn't just about substance abuse. We get addicted to all kinds of stuff. And it's important to understand the studies that are going on now. Most of what people in our society understand about addiction and how they think about it and deal with it is about 50 years old. There's a lot of really good newer science for how to deal with it. And we're not privy to, or we don't know it. I mean, we're not learning it anywhere. And so we said spiritual leaders should know about this, because it is a spiritual issue in terms of how to get well from it. So we think it's crazy that seminaries send out spiritual leaders with no core competency in addiction and know how to diagnose it, how to refer it, what it does to people. And how can you talk about this human condition, spiritual condition of human beings, without understanding how we internally wrestle with addiction? Because we all do to some degree. It's not either you are addicted or you're not. We're all on the spectrum of some. We all struggle with it. That's why we give up chocolate for Lent, because we want to challenge our addictions, right? We stand up in front of the church and say, I'm in bondage to sin and cannot free myself. We're admitting to God, I think, say, and do things that hurt me and other people, and I can't seem to stop without your help. That is, to me, a confession of addiction of some kind. It's not extreme, but understanding how addiction works helps us understand human beings and how we think and behave and how we hurt and deal with our hurt. So we thought we need to help educate. And what really inspired me was what do I have, Connie, till 11? Yep. Okay. Yeah, I always say that too. So I was at the University of Minnesota, and I was listening to all the state leaders. There was a gathering of state leaders coming together to talk about the opioid crisis. So it was in 2016. And we heard the sheriffs speak, we heard the governor speak, we heard state senators speak, but Amy Klobuchar got up and said, and Amy's been working on this for a long time. Her father was a recovering alcoholic. She's a lot of passion around this. And she said, we're doing everything we can to solve this opioid crisis, but what we can affect is legislation and laws and how people can get drugs legally. So they can limit how many pills a doctor gives for treating pain. They were given like 40, and so we passed laws to say, you know what, start with 10. You don't need, 40 is enough to get really addicted, 10 isn't. So anyway, so they started changing a lot of that. But the opioid problem was so bad that people were addicted, and they needed, opioid withdrawal is just absolutely horrible. And so people who had become addicted needed those drugs, and if they couldn't get them legal anymore, they began to find them illegally. And that's where the real problem drugs are. Those are the ones that are laced with fentanyl and things that will kill you. So people not intending to overdose are overdosing. More people are dying, and it's a serious crisis. And so she said, we've run out of ideas. Everything we're doing is actually making death rate go up. And we need help. We need everybody to know that this is all of our problem, and we all need to do something. And so we're looking for answers. We don't know what they are. And I had an epiphany, and I had this moment of realizing that there's a church on every street corner in this country of some denomination, some place of worship. And almost none of them are doing anything with addiction. So that's starting to change, but it's still very tip of the iceberg. What if every church even did a little something? Had a number in the bulletin for people to call, or had a brochure in the narthex. I know there's a robust ministry at St. Stephen's Lutheran Church in Bloomington that got started because a recovering person came to that church and saw that they had a brochure that talked about addiction. And just like me going into Holden and seeing that here was a church that talked about that, she saw that and said, this is a church that understands me. These are my people. She joined, and she was leading their addiction awareness team. And that church is doing some of the best addiction awareness ministry in the cities. I mean, they're really amazing. It's because they had a brochure in their narthex. So a small thing, but what a difference. So she's doing stuff to change lives. So we thought, we need to educate faith leaders and faith communities to do more with this. So I went back to the FRLC. I said, let's do a conference and teach leaders how to deal with this. So we put on a conference at the Doubletree in Bloomington. And we thought, after 30 years of doing FRLC, we knew how resistant the church was to this topic. People were glad we were doing it, but didn't really want anything to do with it. And so we thought, I wonder if anybody would come. We brought the best speakers we could find, people, scholars and faith leaders that were doing some great work in this area. Excuse me. We thought we'd get 40 or 50 local pastors to come. This is Minnesota, land of 10,000 treatment centers. So we thought we'd get a few, and we had to cut off registration at 200. And what was most amazing is that they came from 34 states, Canada, and 17 different denominations. So we thought, wow. I mean, so the hotel said 200 your max. We had to stop registrations and say we're full. And we had this mountaintop gathering, and people were going, finally the church is talking about this. It was just great. There were people there that knew about recovery, people that didn't, people, all over the map, but a lot of enlightenment happening. One pastor who came was there because of a CPE class she was taking, and she was told to go to a 12-step meeting. She came out of that meeting realizing that she had an addiction to food, and so she went back and joined OA, Overeaters Anonymous. And when I heard about that, I called her when I heard she was coming to the second conference we did, said, would you give a little testimony about, that impact of that first conference? She gave what could have been a keynote address. I mean, it was just dynamic. She got up and talked about losing 85 pounds, about having a relationship with God like she'd never had before. But what was amazing is she said, I'm a Lutheran pastor. I have a doctorate degree from Luther Seminary, and I've never heard about this stuff before. She said, we have a lot of work to do because this stuff saves lives. And so that was an amazing experience. We came out of that first conference saying, we got to do this again. And all my colleagues said, you got to do it again, Ed. And I said, yeah, I know, but I have a full-time job. This is a lot of work. And so we did it again in 2019 with a similar result, or actually more people from more states, more denominations. And from there, my colleagues said, you need to make this a ministry. And so I've spent a year trying to figure out how to be a full-time senior pastor of a big church and start a nonprofit. And I tried to do that by negotiating with my church to reduce my hours and pay and do both of these, but they were both full-time jobs. And so after about a year, I said, I'm just going to go for it. I left my job with pay and benefits to do this, and I just really felt called to it. I mean, it felt like all the streams of my life were leading up to this. And so a month after I resigned and started doing this work, COVID-19 hit. And so it was like, God, what have you done to me? And I thought the timing couldn't have been worse, but actually, COVID has made the crisis worse. The addiction crisis has multiplied and amplified, and mental health issues are going through the ceiling. And what we know about addiction is that almost under every single addiction is mental health issue. And that as soon as you deal with the addiction, there's the pain that they're dealing with. And so we realized that coming out, and now with COVID, that's all been amplified, and so the need is greater than ever. And so I'm going to show you a couple of statistics real quick here. You've heard these before. This isn't news, but it's always shocking to keep seeing it. So we formed the Center of Addiction and Faith, a 501c3, to awaken faith communities to address addiction. We just want to get everybody doing something. And so coming out of the COVID pandemic, we're dealing with a huge increase in addiction problems. Nearly 1/3 of people in the U.S. who drink alcohol have increased their consumption since the pandemic began, and nearly 30% who used drugs reported an increase in the activity. Deaths from overdose rose 27% in the 12 months ending August 2020 over the prior 12 months. 2021 alcohol-related deaths in the U.S. This is really a hard statistic to get because some of this is cirrhosis of the liver, so they say it's a liver, but what they can determine is alcohol-related, at least 95,000 a year. Tobacco-related deaths, the worst addiction of all in terms of killing people, 480 a year, 2021. Overdose deaths now are over 100,000 a year this last year. So that's 1 year, and this is year after year deaths. So, we get alarmed by COVID, but this is more than COVID. It's all preventable, and often it's young people with big futures and lives and families. Drug overdose deaths in Minnesota from March 2020 to March 2021, 1,177 in Minnesota. That's a 42.3% increase over the previous 12-month period. And then the cost to all of us. It includes $249 billion for alcohol abuse, $300 billion for tobacco abuse, $271 billion for illegal drug use. I have duplicate slides, apparently. But other addictions ruining lives include gambling, sexual activity, pornography, eating disorders, internet use, exercise, work, other things. Process addictions harm an individual's physical and emotional health. They damage interpersonal relationships and may cause legal or financial problems. These are the kinds of people who are dying from accidental overdose. These are actually the people, some of them who have died. So we want to change this. I don't expect we'll end addiction, but I think we can mitigate a lot of it and help those we can, especially those who want help. Right now, 10% of the people who want help can get help. Not everybody has access to help, either from lack of insurance or treatment centers are full, they can't get in, that sort of thing. So instead of helping people, we throw them in jail. And if you want to recovery-proof somebody, the least successful person to able to become sober and in recovery is anybody who's been to jail or prison. It almost hardens them to be able to get well. And so we're throwing people into jail for a health issue and then making it impossible for them to get well afterwards because what they experience in jail makes it really, really hard for them to get well because they're so further traumatized. Jail is an incredibly traumatizing experience. Come out of there feeling pretty hopeless. And so we got to do better than that. And so we're trying to change that. The Center of Addiction and Faith was formed, and we're doing what we can to try to raise awareness. And we think if we could get faith communities involved in dealing with this problem, that we could really make a difference. And so COVID hit. I was going to go tell the world about this ministry. I had trips planned. I had to cancel them all, just like you all did, and sit at home and go, what do I do now? And what I did was build a robust website and invite you guys to pick up a flyer here that'll give you a link to it and lists all the things that we're doing on this website. We have our annual conference, which continues. Pick up one of these that has our web address on there. And so the Center of Addiction and Faith is awakening faith communities to address addiction. We do that through our annual conference, through our monthly webinars. Because I couldn't go out and talk to people, what I found was that the world could come to me through webinars. And so we started putting on webinars, how to do ministry during the pandemic, how to start an addiction awareness ministry, the impact of addiction in the Black community, why they're dealing with such a higher rate, and the trauma that's related to that. So we did all these webinars, and we get now for our monthly webinars 300 to 400 people to register. I mean, it's really extraordinary. So people are interested in coming. We have a podcast we do where I interview pastors who've been through the recovery process. These stories are inspirational because they're stories of redemption and what God has done for these people's lives. And those stories always have to move us. When we hear about what God does to heal someone in a miraculous way. In fact, that's the image that I have on the cover of my website is the demoniac who Jesus freed. And when Jesus freed him from his mental illness or addiction, whatever he was dealing with, do you remember he cast out those demons into the pigs and they ran into the ocean? After that was done, this man was in his right mind. He was healed. He was whole. And he said, I want to follow you. And Jesus said, no, I want you to go tell people what God has done for you. I don't know how many people that man went on to help, but I believe by him sharing his story far and wide, he touched a lot of lives. And isn't that kind of what Jesus does at the end of every gospel? He says, now therefore go and proclaim the gospel. He calls us to go out and share how God has made a difference in our lives. And it's powerful stuff when we do that. So these podcasts are there. We have 12-step groups that we've started. We have a Wednesday night one that's for Episcopalians. We have a Sunday night one for Lutherans. We have a Thursday meeting for just clergy. And that has grown to about 30 pastors nationwide recovering from codependency, which is addiction to people. When you put people ahead of your own self to the detriment of yourself and your family, pastors are famous for this. We're almost by profession codependents because we care so much about other people, we tend to not care about ourselves enough and don't take care of ourselves well. And so that becomes an addiction. So we have codependents, we have alcoholics, we have addicts, we have people who struggle with food, overeating, people who grow up in alcoholic families. You get a whole set of issues if you grow up with an alcoholic mother or father that you need to recover from the trauma of that. That's pretty widespread. So what's nice about these groups that we offer, because there's 12-step groups everywhere in the world. You can get them anywhere in the world you go, you can find a 12-step group. But what's unique about the ones that we're starting is that they tend to be churchgoers. And so they speak the language of both church. They can refer to Lent, and everybody will know what they're talking about. Whereas in a 12-step group, typically if you go down the street and go to a 12-step group, you're always welcome. But they really don't want you to talk about your church or your faith or your religion. That's really not okay. And these meetings, people are able to do that. And it's not like that's all they do, but it really adds a richness. And so we have this growing meeting for clergy. They're coming from Canada, all across the U.S., and from, I haven't done a count, but we got Methodists and Presbyterians and Lutherans. And, well, Lutherans really don't have a problem, but the rest of them are pretty messed up. And then we do training events, and then we have our smartphone app. And I put that over here, too, because I want you to take that. If you have a smartphone, you could actually pull up your phone now and do it now if you want. Go to your app store and look for Center of Addiction and Faith, and it's free. And it has all these things that I just described on there, all our podcasts. So if you're driving somewhere to visit someone, you're going to be on the road for 2 hours, listen to a story. They're really great stories. Or listen to one of the webinars. But it's got our calendar of events. It's got breaking news about addiction, some of the latest stories and articles and studies, and those come out regularly and are listed here. There's worship resources, there's devotions, there's a reading list for those who want to learn more about addiction, links to our websites, a lot of helpful resources. Anyway, we're really proud of our app, so please go and get that and make use of it. So I thought maybe I could just open it up to questions that you might have that I didn't think to answer as I was sharing. But I can tell you that, I thought, well, how can you respond? I mean, what can you do? And I've got a couple things I thought of, is to visit our website, just see what we're doing and learn about how we're addressing it and how we talk about it in terms of faith communities and their involvement. There's a sign up on that website if you want to get our newsletters and notifications of events. You can sign up on the website, so sign up on our mailing list. Attend our webinars. They come out monthly. Download our app. I would encourage you to consider, as a congregation, forming an addiction awareness team. I know that you have people in this church who have struggled with this. I know that you have people in recovery who would be glad to be on a team like that, to brainstorm ways that this community could be a welcoming place for people struggling with addiction, and to be a resource to the pastors. So that, anyway, addiction awareness teams are great to have in a congregation. Become a mission partner. I have I'm inviting congregations to partner with us to make all of these resources available to your congregation. We do a covenant with you and talk about what it means to be a recovery-friendly congregation and what you get in exchange for that. And you support the work that we're trying to do. So this is a covenant. I'm going to leave this with Connie somehow that you can look at and think about, for your church. And then you can donate. If anybody has $500,000, $1 million, I would love to talk with you, but I trusted God to provide for this ministry, and I'm still doing that. One of the things, I wrote a book, and this is sort of a guilty plug here, but I wrote a novel about a pastor in recovery who solves a murder in his congregation. It's a murder mystery. But you'll recognize a lot of the characters in the book. They're all Lutherans, and they're all interesting. It's a little bit Garrison Keillor-ish, but it's gotten great reviews. So if you want to support me personally in my ministry, buy my book. Okay,